Okay, so octopuses. March, North Carolina lawmakers quietly introduced a bill to ban octopus farming before it even starts here. On the surface, seems straightforward, but dig a little deeper, and this isn't just about one weird niche, it's about a bigger question. How do we decide which creatures deserve protection, especially when they're nothing like us? This is Rin Smith, and welcome to Shoresides, where we tell stories about the North Carolina coast. There are currently no octopus farms in North Carolina, or anywhere really. The octopus farm in Spain that's brought up the controversy actually hasn't opened yet. But if you're wondering if octopus consumption is actually a thing here, a review of online menus by Shoresides identified 27 distinct octopus dishes being served around the state. They were often grilled or charred at Mediterranean and Spanish venues, costing between $14 and $28. The largest concentration of octopus dishes happened to be found inland, in the Triangle area. Still, on the whole, that's not a vibrant market. So, what's behind the proposed ban? Is it a precaution or a precedent? What does it say about how we treat the smartest thing in the room when that thing has 8 arms and no bones? We found someone who could help us sort it all out.
Dr. Jennifer Mather, full professor in the psychology department at University of Lethbridge, which is in Alberta, Canada, which is obviously nowhere near the sea, which just means that when I get to do field work, I have to go travel. Given modern communications, it doesn't matter so much. By the way, I'm an expert on octopus behavior and cognition and personality and natural history as well, I guess I would say.
Jennifer, by the way, was also the scientific advisor for the Academy Award-winning documentary, My Octopus Teacher. If you haven't seen it, it's really amazing.
Well, what really simply makes them so unique is that they're living by their wits. So every animal has to figure out how to get food, how to stop being food for somebody else, and in the end, how to reproduce. And octopuses come from mollusks. Now, mollusks are what you think of when you think of shelled animals, snails, clams, and they're protected by these shells. But evolutionarily, the cephalopods, the octopuses, the squid, and the cuttlefish, gave up protection. And they also don't have any spines, so they don't have, most of them at any rate, don't have any poison. So the way they survive is by being smart.
Jennifer says that what makes them so smart is what makes us so smart, a well-developed brain. Octopuses even have some advantages over us.
They have a brain. They have very good senses, and they have complex, wonderful movement. So the input and the output they're very good at. They're not exactly the same as us vertebrates. They have eyes, and the eyes function similarly, but we don't discriminate the plane of polarization of light, and they do. We are very poor at chemical sensing, and they are fabulous. They have hundreds of suckers to suction cups on each arm, and these arms each have, believe it or not, hundreds of chemical and tactile receptors. So while there's nothing terribly wrong with our ability to feel and to pick up information with our fingers, we're just nowhere near them.
Despite all their skill and wit and the title of that documentary Jennifer helped with, octopuses are pretty terrible at making friends.
Well, one of the things that I haven't mentioned is that octopuses are solitary animals. Of course, in order to reproduce, they have to find a mate, but that comes very much at the end of the lifespan, and it comes with a little bit of peril attached to it.
Octopuses are apt to engage in various forms of cannibalism, which, if you look it up, is a deeply disturbing rabbit hole to go down, and one reason they'd be difficult to manage in captivity.
Actually, all the cephalopods are cannibals, not that they make a practice of it. I call them sort of casual cannibals. But that is the big problem with deciding that you're going to farm them, because you can't farm them if you have one every 10 feet. Or you can, but you're just not going to make any money.
Horrifically, octopuses may even eat their own limbs when crammed together, according to one Newsweek article. But apparently, a Spanish seafood company has designed a way around that.
The Nueva Pescanova people who are planning on the farming, they say that they have developed a particular strain of octopus that tolerate one another's presence. But one of the problems for us as scientists is that when we say, okay, show us the proof, they say, oh no, we can't do that. That's a trade secret. So we don't rely on information that people aren't willing to share, information where we haven't any data. And I have to admit that at one point they said, oh, we've reduced the mortality to 1 in 10. That's still very high. It's very high if you consider what the animals are going through in particular. And most octopuses have very, very tiny eggs, the size of a rice grain. And what happens in the life cycle of the octopus is that the female lays a whole bunch of eggs, tens of thousands in the case of most of the commercial species. She tends them until they hatch, at which point they float off in the open ocean. We call them paralarvae. And they float off and have a completely different way of life for up to several months. And when they get to, maybe about an inch long, they begin to drift down to the bottom and settle on the surface and hide and look like the miniatures of what we think of as octopuses. This has really stood in the way of very, very competent people trying to figure out how to cultivate octopuses, because they really aren't, to some extent, cultivable at that size. And I don't know exactly what the Nueva Pescanova people are doing about this.
And according to Jennifer, that's just the beginning of a list of reasons octopus farming is impractical.
Practical concern number 1, how do we get them through this paralarval stage? Practical problem number 2 is that octopuses excrete pure ammonia. So they pee ammonia. Okay. That kills them very quickly if you don't refresh the water.
As far as Jennifer knows, the company was planning to address this problem by pumping water into their farm tanks from a cove, but failed an environmental review related to the plan because pumping that amount of ammonia back into the cove would end up killing everything in sight.
Practical problem number 3. When you raise an animal in captivity, you have to feed it. No, octopuses eat a variety of clams, crabs, so they're predators. So if you want to give them their natural diet, of course you'd have to get crabs, clams, snails. And in fact, they really are very turned on by crabs. Absolutely love them, eat a lot of them. But crabs are actually more expensive to purchase than are the octopuses themselves.
So the options seem to be lose money by feeding them expensive meals or by raising really small octopuses.
People who have been working on this have generated artificial diets, which are what they call pelletized fish meal. And this is their plan to feed the octopuses, I assume. And there is a problem because the octopuses do eat this stuff, but they don't terribly like it. So they don't eat a lot of it and they don't gain weight very well. Countering the whole idea because the animals aren't going to weigh very much and they're not going to be good commercially. Practical problem number 4. No, number 4 is not really a practical problem. I suppose it is. Octopuses are not highly prized culinary treats. They are eaten by peoples all across the world, but they tend to be the second choice. So if you want people to pay a lot of money for them, then I'm not quite sure why you're cultivating them, because they won't pay.
This is where, for informational purposes, having tasted octopus comes in. And full disclosure, I tried it once. I didn't like it. It was chewy, sort of like fishy bubble gum.
I did try an octopus. It was long ago before I really realized how smart the animals are. And I don't eat my animals, but they don't really have a lot of taste. Of course, there's lots of things that don't have a lot of taste, and if you put sauces with them and you put other food with them, they taste just fine. But octopuses don't really have a taste qua octopus. The other thing is they're not terribly easy to cook. So I don't have an objective viewpoint on this, but I don't think they're a culinary treat.
Yeah, maybe none of that matters. According to Nueva, they're just trying to help.
Yes, it's not clear to me, but it seems that their argument is something to the effect of that there's too much fishing pressure on open ocean octopuses, and that by cultivating them and generating a generous supply, they will reduce the external fishing pressure. But generally speaking, octopuses are doing very well in the wild. And there's an interesting, sad reason for this, which is that their predators, the top predators, the big marine mammals, the big fish, the sharks, they're not doing very well because we have decimated their populations. So without so much predator pressure, the cephalopods are doing fairly well in the wild. So the argument of cultivating these animals because they're threatened in the wild isn't true. Okay, I haven't got to the ethical problems at all.
The ethical problems, she says, are pretty simple.
You're crowding an asocial animal. And yes, they will attack and eat one another. I don't know to what extent they've been able to reduce the incidence, but if they say 110, then you can figure that if you have 100 octopuses, you've got 10 dead ones. So the others have eaten very well of them. But it's not just that they would die.
It's about trauma.
If you've got an intelligent animal that we believe has the possibility of consciousness, then we're probably generating a lot of fear.
In fact, octopuses are so sensitive that their anxiety is part of how you catch them.
You can actually put down pots of the right size. And fishers in the Mediterranean do this, and they put down a string of pots, and then they come back several days later, and there are octopuses hiding in the pots. This is how people who want to catch them for research do so, because of course they're in good condition. But fishers have fished for octopuses for millennia.
In the end, it would be great if we needed neither octopus farming or an octopus ban.
I have a lot of trouble given the practical problems that Nueva Pescanova faces and the ethical reaction which they have aroused. I'm not quite sure why they're keeping on. And I'm no help on that one. It seems to be they haven't really got a commercially viable situation. And they're getting a lot of reactions from people who say, oh, don't, quote, don't crowd a solitary, cannibalistic, smart animal and make them go in fear for their lives. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to ask. And I just don't know. But I don't think I would expect it to expand to North Carolina anytime soon.
But there are also broader questions.
I did a paper on it in Journal called Animals called How Octopuses Are Going to Be the Poster Child for Invertebrate Welfare. So I hope they're going to be the example that causes us to think about what does it mean to be harvesting animals? What does it mean to be keeping animals in artificial conditions? How do we know if they have pain? Does it matter if they don't? We're kind of sentient snobs, I'm afraid, that we don't think about protecting species if we don't think they have feelings. And I think that's wrong. We ought to be thinking about and caring about all the animals on the earth. We don't necessarily know how they react to situations. We don't know what we might protect them, in what situation and what we might be doing. But I think we're going to have to come to terms with that because people are beginning to talk about insect farms and raising literally billions of insects and grinding them up for feed. So maybe this is the thin edge of the wedge. We can stop saying, oh, we only care about animals like ourselves. And we start thinking, oh, how could we care for animals not like us?
I'm Ren Smith, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks to Dr. Jennifer Mathers. To learn more about Shoresides, visit us at shoresides.org.